I'm Mark, I'm 38 and I'm a recovering gambling addict. It'd be easy to think it started off bad, but it certainly didn't for me. I was a happy child. I was brought up off a single mum, so my dad left home when I was about 4. But I got a lot of love and attention off the rest of my family. Started progressing at one thing from a young age, and that was football. So I was a promising footballer as a young lad. I represented my town, my county, captained a number of sides and played for Bolton Wanderers and Man City by my mid-teens. I was quite vocal on a football pitch, maybe a little bit of a worrier off a football pitch, a little bit of an overthinker. I think the turning point for me was at the age of 15, where I had a few major life events happen. The first one, I became a young dad, and I also was reintroduced to my real dad around this time. And one of the first things that I did with him was place a bet, and sort of won some money at that age, which was a massive turning point for me. But also what it gave me that day when I placed my first bet was escapism from that situation that I was going through. I was underage at the time, so I had to sneak in a bookies to place that bet. It's very much different today. You can download 2,000 apps at any one time, but then I was sneaking in a bookies. I think for the first 4 or 5 years, I certainly didn't think I had an addiction. I thought I had a financial problem, because hand in hand with a gambling problem comes money difficulties. And what changed for me was me getting in quite a lot of debt from a young age, and that first started off with family members. Then it was payday loans and overdrafts, and when I couldn't go to anyone else, I started to go to the likes of loan sharks and drug dealers. Now, when you don't pay these people back, it's a little bit different to not paying an overdraft back. I was attacked with an hammer on one occasion because I owed a group of money people. My mum was constantly finding out about things like this, and I think that was the biggest impact. My mum and my children were the people that were closest to me, and that really did affect me. I did try and get some help at the age of 21. I went to something what they call a fellowship meeting, but I remember being in that meeting and thinking, my problem isn't that bad, it's a financial problem, and if someone comes along and gives me this large amounts of money, or my mum comes along and bails me out again, I'll be fine. The truth is, over this period of time, my mum bailed me out, my other family members, my friends, and it was just enabling me really, and that's a big point to sort of hammer home. It was just enabling me and keeping me going, and that's no fault of their own. Addicts are very manipulative, and I certainly become very manipulative. Over the next 4 or 5 years, my gambling spiraled out of control to the point where I was going to work every day in a shirt and tie. I had quite a good job as a quantity surveyor. I had a nice company car, and I think this sort of made people think that I had it all going on. This person that had it all going on used to constantly think about taking his own life. I was constantly attempting to take my own life, not because I didn't want it to be here, just because I created this life for myself that I absolutely hated. And people say to me, well, why didn't you just stop gambling? The truth is, I didn't know how to, I didn't know where to go, I didn't know how to stop, and I was very skeptical about services that were available, of thinking they'll never stop me from gambling. Through this as well, I was using recreational drugs, which certainly weren't helping the situation, and I just felt that the walls were closing in. Despite that, I was quite resilient. I ran off to 2 different countries and tried to escape my problems, but the only thing that did is carry my addiction with me on my shoulder, and it just, like I said, them worlds were quickly going to collide. At the age of 27, I'd lost a cousin to suicide, which had a massive impact on me, but I didn't really sort of deal with that situation well. I just avoided the situation, and I just gambled more and took more drugs. Despite after being on the run for 2 years, I did decide I was going to come back to Bolton and try and start again. And for this next 2 or 3 years, I thought it couldn't get any worse than it did, to the point where I owed 24 different people money in the end, and my debt was £306,000. The people that I were getting involved with were becoming more serious. I ended up being kidnapped, bundled into a car. And if you would have told me at the age of 16, when I was a promising footballer at Man City, that by the age of 29, I was going to drive every family member away, I was going to be a bad dad, I was going to ruin my life, I was going to steal off my family, I was going to steal off my loved ones, my friends. I was constantly in desperation for money. If you would have told that 16-year-old boy that was going to be the mark of today, I would have laughed at you. I hated the person that I become. I constantly had this feeling of I don't want to be here anymore. I used to often walk down the street and look at a car and think, should I just throw myself in front of that car? All them feelings were going through my head every single day. However, there was help and support out there. I just needed to find it. I just needed to admit I was powerless over the addiction, admit that I was never going to win this large amount of money, because the truth is I did win large amounts of money and it always went back on, and that's a big sign of a gambling addiction. No win's ever bigger enough. And at the age of 29, I finally arrived at a rehab in the West Midlands. And by that point, like I said, I'd lost my family. I wasn't seeing my children at the time. I was a failure as a dad, and I hate saying that. And I absolutely hated the man that I'd become. But from the minute I walked through the doors at that rehab, my life started to change. Not overnight. I had to rebuild over a period of time, and that was quite tough. I thought I'd come home to a welcome home party from rehab, and I came home to all the destruction that I'd caused. But I kept trying. I was consistent with my approach. I put my recovery before anything in the world. And as a result of that, I'm now 9 years without a bet. I believe I'm a good dad. I believe I'm a good son. I've got them qualities and them values back that I had before my addiction. And I believe me getting help that time was life-saving. It's been a long, hard road, but I still have stresses today. Life throws some curveballs at you. I had emergency back surgery last year. I live with a chronic illness that I find terribly difficult with every day. But I believe also rehab wasn't just about stopping gambling. It was about being a better person, becoming a man. And I believe I became a man when I went into rehab.
So following from your experience, why do you think it's important that people become more aware?
Gambling's the fastest growing addiction in the UK and the highest rate of suicide. It's hidden, it's seen as glamorous, it's seen as a part of our culture. If you watch a gambling addict, you'll never see someone committing suicide. You'll see the person that's jumping up for joy and celebrating the biggest win. There's a reason the bookmakers are so rich, and I'm not anti-industry, but I think over the last few years, like I said, it's just become this massive, massive problem in society. And also in society today, we're going through a lot of challenging times financially, and what better way to get out of that mess than have that big win that fixes everything. I can assure you, gambling is not a way of making money.
So aside from gambling, why would you believe gaming was such a concern as well at the moment?
Yeah, so I've learned a lot about gaming in the last few years. I was never a gamer. I remember being bought a computer about probably the age of about 12. I remember staying up all night on it and my mum unplugging it and saying, "You're never playing that again." And it was the best thing ever, because I remember how addictive and compulsive I was around that game. Sadly, it came out in gambling years later, but there were loads of similarities between me escaping from reality, what it was like playing a computer game, to what it was like gambling. But the lines are becoming blurred because now you can lose money gaming. So we're working with a lot of young people across the Northwest and England that are spending a fortune on things like loot boxes and FIFA packs. And when they lose a lot of money on the parent's credit card, I've often said, "What was going through your mind when you were thinking that?" And they say, "I was just pressing a button." Well, that's exactly what I would have said when I was on a roulette machine in a bookmaker's. You don't really see it as monetary value. If a young person had £3,000 in his hand, they'd probably realise the amount of money they were spending. But when you're just pressing a button, it's not real, or it's certainly not real to them, but it's certainly real to the parents when they find out the credit card's been maxed on these things. Terribly addictive.
So you mentioned about gaming and gambling affecting like the Northwest of the UK at the moment. How do you think gambling is affecting Wigan?
It's been identified as one of the fastest growing addictions and identified as a problem. I do believe areas like Wigan, Bolton, surrounding areas where the working class, you've got a lot of people at times that maybe struggle with the finances. I can vouch for that. I was on benefits for a very long time. I know things get tough, and I know a lot of people are struggling to survive at times, and I think people see it as a way out. People see it as that escapism, switching off, a way out of financial difficulties. I have lots of friends that still do it on a regular basis, people who lose their wage on a regular basis. And the frightening thing is, it's been normalised now. It's not normal working hard all week and turning up for work at 8 o'clock in the morning and getting back at 6 p.m. at night and having nothing to show for it. You can't pay your bills because you've given it all to a bookmakers in hope that you're gonna win a large amount of money. So, like I said, it has been identified as a problem in Wigan, but I hope sessions like this and raising more awareness, not just from ourselves, but the complete borough across Wigan, I hope we get that message and hope we can signpost people to that help and support.
What advice would you give to somebody to address a problem?
The sad thing is the addict is usually the last one to see it, and by that time they've caused complete destruction with the family members, with the loved ones, whether they've got children, whether they've got brothers or sisters, they have all been affected. We say for every one addict it affects 10 people. I affected much more than that, but in particular my loved ones. And it's only when you see them people on their hands and knees crying over a period of time that eventually it finally hits home. And one thing I will say is you don't have to wait until your mum's on her hands and knees crying. You don't have to wait until you're on a psychiatric ward because you've just attempted to take your own life. There are steps you can take much sooner. And one thing I would say to anyone that's struggling, if it's costing you time, if it's costing you money, if it's costing your mental health, if it's costing your relationships, if it's affecting your career, if you're chasing your losses, then hit the stop button. Gambling will never be for you. There are some people that control it. If you're one of them people that can't, I don't believe you can then go back and control it. So if it is any of them things and it's becoming a problem, hit the stop button. You won't be able to do it on your own. Get some professional help and support, and we can certainly signpost you to them organisations.
Finally, following on from that, where would you advise or suggest people could go for help?
There's many forms of help, to be honest, and there's different tiers of it. I think the first one, when we say help, we often think about treatment, but I think sometimes you've got to open up to somebody, whether that's a loved one, whether that's a friend. I think that first point of sort of contact with someone of saying, I have got a problem here, I am powerless over it and I need some help, is sort of quite refreshing, to be honest, as a stage of your recovery. But you won't do it alone. So we often say to people, the biggest step is asking for help. There's actually a step after that, and you've got to follow up with that help, with professional help and support. That can come in many forms. The first place we would always strongly suggest is something called fellowship meetings, which we can put on, so things like Gambling is Anonymous. I did go there as a young lad, and it wasn't that it didn't work for me, it was I just believe I was too young and naive and not committed enough, but they offer some fantastic help. There's great organisations across the Northwest that offer free therapy, and that's important that it's free because most gambling addicts haven't got money. But you might have already gone past them two stages where you feel like, do you know what, I've lost my home, I've lost my family. And there are also rehabs, fantastic organisations, some that we work closely with today, Gordon Moody being one of them. A fantastic rehab that's got places in London, Midlands and in Prestwich, so in the Northwest. They offer free help and support. I went there for 12 weeks for a 12 weeks programme. They rehoused me in a halfway house and things like that. There's lots of help out there. Contact people in the know. Be around people with lived experience who have lived and breathed this addiction but have also lived and breathed recovery. And there is always help and support out there. It can be a very lonely existence being an addict. I remember looking around and thinking, why can't I just be normal? These people look normal. You'd be surprised then people that you walk past in the street every single day that look normal will also be suffering with something, whether it's directly or indirectly. And I think when you're in recovery and you find out, do you know what, I'm not alone, and there's all these people out there that can offer help and support, it's a massive weight off your shoulders. I'm around some great people now. I always say I went to rehab with about 30, 40 friends and come out with 3 or 4 loyal ones, and that's enough. And and more importantly, I've got them people back that I hurt, and my life's okay now.